Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, boxing fans around the world. This is an unscheduled update, mostly because we're coming up on New Year's Eve, of course, and I wanted to give some updates on the boxing world, and this will be broken out into separate segments because there's a lot to talk about in the world of boxing, and I'm optimistic in January, but December is going to be kind of sketchy. But I want to just talk about a couple things that came up that might be of interest to you depending on what level you are as far as a boxing fan, and this is a follow on to some things that I talked about before. Let's go ahead and get started first. On There was supposed to be a fight today, believe it or not, and this was supposed to be the return of Gennady Golovkin, and he was supposed to fight Ryota Murata, and this was supposed to be on DAZN for middleweight at 160. That fight was rescheduled because there were some travel issues related to COVID, and my theory was that Murata was not able to get out from underneath those restrictions. That's a theory. I have not proven it. Couldn't find any evidence of what the actual travel restrictions were that were being imposed or upon whom, but I assume it's Murata because I know that, like with fighters in Japan, there seem to be challenges kind of getting out of there. We also saw issues with Kazuto Ioka. He was supposed to fight Jerwin Ancajas at Super Flyweight on Friday, this Friday, and that also was rescheduled. I don't believe there's a new date. It looked like there was going to be a different opponent. So it looked like the Ioka, he's going to stay in Japan and fight somebody else. That's one of the updates for today. And then Ancajas is going to fight Fernando Martinez, and that's for the IBF title, and that's going to happen in America. So it does seem like it's specific to Japan, the travel restrictions that I was mentioning before. And so if you're watching any of the fighters that are coming out of Japan, regardless of the weight class, then just be aware that the travel restrictions seem to be a bit onerous for those guys. And so it's not that they're not able to fight, just to be clear. It's that they're not able to travel for fights. And so if it's not an opponent that's already in Japan with them, those fights are likely not to happen, and they're either going to be rescheduled, which is unlikely because they don't know when the restrictions are going to be lifted, or they'll just continue to fight guys who are local. Now, Japan has a lot of fighters that are directly there that only fight there, so it's not like there's a dearth of fighters to fight, but it means that you're not going to see some of the biggest fights. You certainly won't see unifications or world title fights because many of those guys, they're either in England or they're in the United States. Some of them are in Australia now with Cambosis, but Cambosis is able to travel. So you've got kind of this mix at every different divisions where, because of the restrictions, it's not that they're sick, it's not that there's anything wrong, just that it's hard for them to get out of where they're at to go where the big fights are. So those might be either rescheduled or just changed, but chances are they're just going to be changed to a different opponent because the guys are able to go, they just can't travel. So let's break down what should have happened this week and then what's changed, just so you're aware. And let's start back with, again, Gennady Golovkin. He was supposed to return after his outage. He's been out for a long time. And he was going to face Ryota Murata, which was a pretty good fight. Murata is a pretty good opponent. Good test for where Golovkin's at. People believe that Murata would have tested Golovkin very heavily, and that Golovkin is on a steep slide. He's on a very steep slide after his performances recently, especially the one with Derevyanchenko. That we saw cracks right in the armor. It kind of started before this. It started really with what we saw against Canelo in the second fight, where Golovkin wasn't able to do the same thing that he was able to do in the first. Now, Bob Arum, Top Rank, he promotes Murata, had wanted to have Golovkin go to Japan and fight there. And that was the plan. They said that was what was going to happen. And they were going to fight on Friday and at the Saitama Arena in Japan, and that would have been broadcast on DAZN because Golovkin is a DAZN fighter predominantly. But because of the travel restrictions, which means that they were not able to get Golovkin into Japan. So unlike with Ioka, it's a different situation. And it might be a two-way ban, but in this case, it was specifically, looks like Golovkin not able to get in there to go and do the fight. So they decided to go ahead and reschedule it rather than change the opponent, because Murata's a draw. He's a draw, a local draw, and so they wanted to get more eyes on Golovkin. They wanted to get him kind of back in front of people, get his name back out there. The problem, I think, with both these fighters, Golovkin's coming up on 40 years old. Murata's not a young guy, but he's not dramatically old, but they're kind of older guys. But it would not be necessarily a straight dangerous fighter necessarily for Golovkin to fight Murata. And it would be a good test of where he's at. And remember, Golovkin's only to this date lost the one time. It's just that his performances have been on a steep decline ever since the second Canelo fight. And then all he's really done, and I'll quote Canelo, what's he really done? Nothing, is call out Canelo for the third fight. But in his other fights that he had, Steve Rolls and Derevyanchenko, we haven't seen that Golovkin is anywhere close to what he used to be, number one. And number two, he didn't bring anything to the table. The other problem, he was able to stop Zaramita, but nobody asked for that fight. And the other, when we look at championships, Golovkin has been comfortable staying at 160 predominantly the vast majority of his career until Canelo basically took the belts when he beat him. And then Canelo went and was fighting at 160 while also fighting at 168 and still fighting at 154. And he was still defending titles in these. And then he goes and fights Kovalev at 175 and wins the title there. Now, when you look at the comparison of performance, and we have to think about belts, it's not close. It's clear that Canelo is actively putting his name out there, maintaining his status as the top draw in the business by going after champions. And people like NSB can trash who he fought, but the point is they were champions and he beat them, many of them undefeated when he fought them. So he was actively going after these guys. Now, Canelo has since said, look, if we do fight, he's going to need to come up to at least 168 to meet me there. Golovkin, at one point, his trainer anyway, or his manager, was on record by saying anyone from 154 to 168, and then all of a sudden, it's like, okay, well, you got to drain him down. You got to meet me at 160. And he's never wanted to step out of his comfort, except when it was Floyd Mayweather, which he said, yeah, I'll fight you at 147, knowing that's a joke. And then, yeah, I'll fight you at 154, knowing that Floyd was never going to go to 154 again because he couldn't even make 152 against Canelo. So Golovkin's kind of done this smoke and mirrors dance, presenting himself as the A side. And I don't blame him individually. I think he's had bad management. I think he's had people that have gotten in his ear and convinced him that he's higher than he was. And I think the first performance against Canelo was a good performance. I actually had Golovkin winning that fight. But it is true that since the second fight, where I felt Canelo won comfortably, he was walking him down Mexican style, in my opinion, I felt that Golovkin hasn't done anything to warrant or earn that third fight in my eyes. And that would have been critical for him to kind of regroup, and get back in there, to quote Sugar Free, regroup from whoop whoop and change the game. And I don't see that he's done that at all. So now that he's going after belts, that's a smart strategy because it's a little bit enticing. However, if I were managing Golovkin's group, his whole thing, I would have told him to just challenge at 168, get an easy belt before Canelo had a chance to unify, which would have forced Canelo to then fight him in order to achieve his dream. Basically, run the train off the tracks, and he didn't do that. But he had the chance to do that. He could have easily beat Rocky Fielding. I believe that firmly. I think he could have beat Billy Joe Saunders. I think he could have beat Callum Smith. Like, if I look at the fighters that Canelo beat at 168, I can go down that list, and with the exception of one of them, that being Caleb Plant, I can see that Golovkin could have beat each and every one of them. That would have given him a title. Then he has a case because Canelo has to go through him to unify the division. Just like Canelo had to go through him in order to get close to unifying 160, put yourself in that position, block him, like actively do it. And they didn't do it because, for whatever reason, possibly because of a fear that his power wouldn't carry up, Golovkin did not step out of his comfort to go after those fights. And I'm not sure if it's just mismanagement, like his management's telling him bad advice, or Golovkin himself is afraid of testing or pushing himself. I don't know the reason behind it. All I'm saying is that that's the kind of thing that even Canelo, I think, would have expected him to do, as if you're really serious about the fight and you're not just trying to cash out, then do something about it. Get in my way to where I have no choice but to fight you. And, NSB and other places will say, no, Canelo should just fight him. And, Canelo lost both fights. Look, at the end of the day, Canelo got his hand raised. I would like to see a trilogy. However, it's a business. It's a business of boxing. Gennady knows that. He knows that. And I think he's been force-fed guys who are either on the way out, right, or just went there for the check and for so long, and it kind of gave him a big head. And then in the bright lights against Canelo, he showed up very well in the first fight, I thought, but he didn't get his hand raised. It happens. Okay, so then you run it back, and then the second time he's teasing Canelo about no Mexican style, and they're out there taunting him. They basically just piss Canelo off to where Canelo just goes in there and walks him down Mexican style, to the point that Gennadi's own freaking trainer was celebrating Canelo, and Julio Cesar Chavez, the legend, is praising Canelo. And the funny part, if you go back to that interview segment, he's like, you need to teach Gennady how to cut off the ring, and it was beautiful. So this is the kind of stuff that I think people expect out of Gennady Golovkin, is to actually, if you really want that fight, if you really think you can make that fight happen, force it to happen by doing something that cuts Canelo off at the knees. Until you're willing to do that, you're just all talk, or as they say, the young folks today, all cap. When you're just out there screaming about, I'm the only one who should be fighting Canelo, and I know how to beat him, and nobody else can beat him, and I got the thing, and Canelo, why are you running, and all this. Canelo's not running. Canelo's making history. He's repeatedly making history while you're doing nothing. That's really what true boxing fans, I'm not talking NSB, I'm talking real boxing fans, see. You're doing nothing. It doesn't matter what happened. You didn't get your hand raised against Canelo Alvarez at the end of the day, regardless of why. You already knew going in how hard it is to get a decision against Canelo Alvarez. It doesn't even matter why that's true. The point is that means you need to do something about it to where it doesn't go to a decision. Even Floyd Mayweather couldn't get a unanimous against Canelo Alvarez despite a dominant performance. So that should have already told you what you needed to do to get that guy out of there, and you failed. You couldn't knock him out. You couldn't knock him down, and that would have been necessary, basically getting the heck out of there. And no, he wasn't going to get blown out like the guys you fought before that, but that's Canelo Alvarez. He's improved as a fighter 10 times what he used to be when he fought Jose Cotto. So we can't just say Canelo's running. He's not running. He's making history. Why isn't Gennady Golovkin actively working to make history? The Murata fight is a step in the right direction, but it's still stuck at 160 where Canelo is not. So if you're going to say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and just stay here and unify 160, great. That means you're going to need to eventually meet Jamal Charlo. And I would love to see that fight. I don't think we see it, but I would love to see it, because he's basically now the last point, the last threat that I can see at 160 remaining. And if you're going to fight him, cool, but I don't think you're going to. So then stop squawking about Canelo and just make your case and make your history. I believe you missed an opportunity. Something tells me we don't see a third fight, because Golovkin sat instead of what he should have done, which is just go up to 168 and beat Rocky Fielding for a title, and now just sit on it and wait for Canelo to come to him, because he would have eventually had to come to him and go through him in order to achieve what he wanted to do. So people will say, okay, you're just hating on Golovkin. I'm not hating on Golovkin, but you got to understand the business of boxing. If you're going to say that you are the best, then you have to prove it, man. You can't just say it. And we can't just go off of all the, scrubs that you sparked out. We have to look at achievements. What did you achieve that shows that you are doing what you're trying to do? For all the criticism I give Terrence Crawford, the one thing smart that he did do is he called out Jeff Horn. He maneuvered to get Bob Arum to get that title shot. He forced Jeff Horn out of his hometown because he didn't want to fight him in Australia, because he knew that Jeff Horn would beat him on his home turf. He faked a hand injury to basically throw off Jeff Horn's camp and give him a disadvantage so that he could take the belt off of Jeff Horn that Jeff Horn took off Manny Pacquiao, which positioned him to where Errol Spence has no choice but eventually to meet him at some point in order to unify the division, because he knows that that's Spence's goal. Now, the problem I see is that Crawford made a bad decision, because in order for him to do that, he had to basically bow down to Top Rank, sign a new contract, and then sit and waste the vast majority of his career fighting 4 or 5 scrubs before he was able to fight Sean Porter on his way out. Now he's shown that, yes, he can beat a top flight fighter that was still in his prime, because Porter was in his prime, but then he goes independent because he's not able to get any of the promoters to sign him when he really needed to have gone to PBC in the first place. And if he had gone to PBC with the WBO belt, I'm confident we would have seen a lot of these fights earlier. But at least he got the belt. At least he went after something that put himself in Spence's way, so that if Spence truly wants to unify welterweight, he has to go through Crawford. That's what Golovkin needed to do. That's what he did not do. He tried to do it at 160. He failed. Okay, you tried again at 168. If you really want the dude, then you go after him. Like, go and do it. That's the business of boxing, regardless of what you say about Canelo. The point is that he's making history, and in doing so, he is the top guy in boxing. Everybody knows it. That's why everybody wants to fight him, including MMA fighters. That's not going to change. And if you want that greatness, you got to go after greatness. Can't be afraid of it. However, I also believe that Golovkin, being as old as he is, he's going to need to retire here soon. He can't keep going after these wars. Certainly the war against Derevyanchenko, which, of course, Jamal Charlo beat with veritable ease. He can't keep doing that kind of thing. And with Zerameda, the guys like Zerameda and Steve Rolls, that's not going to tell us anything because we already know those guys are 2 notches below where you should be. So we hope that this Murata fight does happen because it'll be a good evaluation of where Golovkin is as a fighter. Is he truly on the way out? I don't think it's assured that Golovkin beats Murata, even though Murata is not young and he's not old. He's kind of in that mid. He's like coming down off the deal. But Murata has had a longer layoff than Golovkin. That said, Golovkin's, I think he's only fought like once a year since 2019. I believe that's true. So, yeah, he fought 2019 against Derevyanchenko and then 2020 against Zerameda. And I don't think he's fought since. So he didn't fight for all 2021. So he has a 1-year layoff. But he's only had 1 fight a year, kind of like Mr. Gary Russell Jr. And then Murata's been out since 2019. So it's kind of this even playing field. I would love to see that fight go forward. They're planning March or April. If it does, I hope it goes forward. If it happens in Japan, then I don't think it's assured that Golovkin wins that. And we might see, Mr. Big Drama Show get completely taken out of the business. Who knows? And then the other fight, again, I mentioned about Ancajas and Kazuto Ioka, and that one has not been rescheduled. They have different opponents now. Ancajas is going to fight Fernando Martinez, and he's from Argentina. This guy, I don't know anything about him, Martinez. I've never heard of him by name, but apparently he's, I don't want to say new because that's not fair because he's had some pro fights. But he has never been in a title match. He has never fought outside his home country. He has never fought in the United States. So there's a lot of, it almost feels like a cherry pick in the sense that you're fighting a guy that the bright lights are going to be on him. He's never had that. He's never been out of his home country. So he may not understand the rules of the road. He doesn't understand how it feels on the big stage, the biggest stages. And so we're not really sure where he stands as an opponent. It feels like a cherry pick just because of all the different things. However, we have seen guys who it's like there's no way this dude should win, and they pull out the upset. Now with Ancajas, he's a solid freaking fighter. He's very underrated. He's done some travel. He's done what he needs to do every single time. He's a champion. He's been a defending champion. And I want to see where this goes because he is up there in the top ranks. He's up there in the top ranks of the division. And I want to see where it goes for Super Flyweight because he's around that whole situation. Now, if he decides to, let's say he decides to kind of get back in the mix with the top 3 in Super Flyweight, which would be, Srisaket Sorongvizai, Estrada, and then Quadras, and then Chocolatito. You got those 4. I think Quadras is kind of on the way out. That's why I said 3. I think Quadras is on the way out, but he's still listed and ranked for whatever reason. But if he gets himself in the mix, we're going to see more exciting fights in that division. That's why I'm kind of cheering for him to make a statement to kind of solidify his place. Now, he's campaigned at lesser weights, just like Gary Russell. He's campaigned at featherweight. Ancajas holds the junior bantamweight title. So he's campaigned at lesser weights, but he is ranked at super flyweight. And so I want to see him get in the mix there if it's comfortable for him because it's fresh blood. I think Rungvisai, he's one of my favorite fighters, but he's a little bit older and he's been through wars every single time. Estrada's a little bit on the decline, but he was able to pull it out against Chocolatito. And then Chocolatito, I think, is on steep decline after he got beat and then sparked out by Rungvisai. And then no matter what NSB says, the bottom line is Chocolatito has 2 losses to Rungvisai, and one of them he shouldn't have lost. He should not have lost that first fight. He definitely shouldn't have lost the second fight. He took the guy lightly both times, and it ended up with him flat on the back, Amir Khan style. So I think Quadras is on the way out. I think Chocolatito's on the way out at some point, but Chocolatito will probably keep fighting. But I think they're on the way out in terms of the durability and the staying power of the division and boxing in general. I think Estrada's here to stay for a few more years. I think Rungvisai is going to keep going for a few more years, and then you get this guy in the mix, and I think we can have those exciting fights again. I'm excited to see that, especially if we do another Superfly tournament, which they're trying to book now to get these guys all fighting each other. And I know that with the way that they booked the tournament, basically Rungvisai was getting the short end of the stick, but it all turned out for the good, and there's going to be some good matchups between those guys, and I want Ancajas back in the mix with them because he's a really good fighter, really excited to watch. So that one's with Martinez is going to happen in sometime in February. Is what they're planning. They have not firmly locked it in, but they're talking about February, and then they just need to find a venue somewhere, possibly on the East Coast. So that's what's happening in just this most recent two fights that were supposed to happen. And the reason I'm covering them again is because they were supposed to happen this week. They got pushed because of the restrictions in Japan with fighters coming in. And then with Ioka, I believe that was a different thing because I think they said they were going to fight in Tokyo. And then, of course, Ancajas was blocked from coming in, just like with Golovkin and Murata. So that might have been it. But then for whatever reason with Ioka, he's fighting a completely different opponent, whereas Murata's waiting it out. So maybe it's just the inbound, and that's the only reason why. It just seems strange that then Murata wouldn't take another fight, and then Golovkin wouldn't take another fight to just kind of sit on it and stay active. Because now with Golovkin, that's 4 more months he'll be out. It's just a weird decisioning there, And both of those fights are exciting fights that I think are worth your time because they will tell us where these guys are. Ancajas gets a lot of flack because of the people he's fought. But I think that he's one that's in development and he's worth watching. I believe this is my opinion. So that's the fights for this week that I wanted to cover in a separate update for those that care about those. I'm going to do a different update for more information for other fights that are about to happen. And one of them really depresses me, but it is what it is. Keep tuned and we'll see where we go with boxing. This next update is going to talk about this joke of Frank Sanchez and everybody overrating him, but whatever.